So are we thinking like AI is going to start writing play scripts for coaches? Is AI going to start then, giving coaches insights as to like, hey, all right, it's third and short. You've got all this, is that going to be like a thing where coaches can literally tap into Gemini? Gemini has all the information, right? Because it can pull it from the internet. It can literally pull it from
Yeah.
live stats and say, okay, based on how the game is going, all the information I have, here is your best play call. Like, is that going to be a thing where coaches are literally ran by AI? What are your thoughts on that?
You know, it can go a lot of different ways. First of all, the thing that you mentioned in terms of the analytics is very key because that's the way the league's gone. And there's you'll hear me full pull from Buddhist philosophy a lot, but one of the
Yes.
things we've talked about is the difference between facts and truth, right? And so with facts, the thing is we all do get wrapped up in facts, but I feel like facts are used to tell stories, and it can be used to tell a lot of different stories to move people in a different direction. But
Hmm.
there's truth is much more personal, right? And, in that story, you've got a little bit of both. The truth is, we never won a Super Bowl with Sean McDermott in that time, right? The facts are there within in those statistics you did. So if someone sat down, let's say it was the GM Brandon Bean, and you're trying to make that case to keep your job, and you're talking to the owner, you're able to take those facts and tell the story that you need, but there's still truth behind it, right? So that's one of the things that there is a difference between facts and truth. But on the AI side of things as well, that is something I've thought about a lot. There is a company out there called Mercor. One of my friends who's a lawyer has done many projects. Are you familiar with Mercor?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so Mercor, what they're kind of like and coming from my recruiting background too, that's part of what got my attention. So they're almost like an in between. So they will hire folks to train models for companies, but you don't know what company it is. They go there and they list their positions, and it was some young guys. They're like some of the youngest billionaires out there. I think they're now. That kind of started this company, and so it's like an AI staffing company, and it's project based work. And interestingly, I looked at some of the contracts on there, and one of them was literally watching basketball games and grading their models on how they announce the games.
Wow.
And I actually did the assessment. They did like a basketball assessment. It talks about some of the like different championships. So how knowledgeable you were about like the '80s basketball era, the '90s. It asks you questions about different eras, and then it asks you different things about general basketball knowledge in terms of
Hmm.
like fouls and things like that. But it's very interesting because I did watch a podcast recently, and they talked about that how essentially when you have the loss of jobs as we have, now you have companies stepping in, and some of the only places folks have to go is to go work for these companies. Or in this case, you're, essentially a contractor as well. And you're literally training AI to replace you in the long term. If you think
Yeah.
about it,
Yeah.
in some folks' situations, that's all they can do. And my buddy, who's a lawyer, he was in a situation, he needed that. And essentially, what he does is he trains them on legal things. A lot of stuff that new, like people coming out of law school, you would probably have hired for, AI models are doing. And that he does a lot of contracts. And so he's reviewing models, work on contracts and things of that sort of is my understanding of it. And they pay very handsomely for this work. There'll be a point when that work's no longer needed because AI will learn from itself. But what was just interesting when you talk about that, that made me think you're right that, the role of AI in sports can go a lot of different directions.
Yep.
And it is right before our eyes happening. And, the way robotics are going, we know the investment that Elon Musk and Tesla's doing as far
Yeah.
as robotics, and a lot of his incentives are tied to getting to that point where you have these, I think they're called Optimus
Hmm.
robots that are there. So I was joking with my friends. We were watching football last fall, and I was like, in the future, you're going to get to a point where you have robots playing football, right? You don't have to worry about injuries.
Concussions gone. There's no IR anymore.
In fact, you won't care. You're gonna. It's kind of like watching monster trucks. You want
Yeah.
them to knock each other's heads off because no one's getting hurt or injured. Now
Yeah.
that won't replace regular football, but there'll be a segment of society that's going to be entertained. Think about the shows that you see all the time, and you're like, I can't believe I'm watching this. Or those shows that you watch that they started out usually in like I think in Japan or other things where people are sliming themselves or falling and doing all this, and you're watching it and you're like, I can't believe I'm watching this, but it's entertaining. There'll be a segment of people that will be interested in watch that.
So before we go on, because I want to make sure I properly introduce you, actually. So everyone, welcome to the podcast. Tonight, I have a very special guest. I have Justin P. from Layup Digital here. Justin is a seasoned recruiter who has left the traditional 9 to 5. He, in my opinion, is a pioneer and really someone I wanted to reach out to and connect with because that's really what this podcast is about, right? Like we have to accept the fact that the future is going to look very differently than what it was today. The roles are changed, positions are going to change, scope of work is going to change. And Justin has gone off and now he's kind of pioneering and he's thinking about the future and problem solving for the future. And he is working on some AI sustainable stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and get to know him a little bit better. So, Justin, welcome to the podcast. I just want to make sure I give you your just due before we go on any further.
I appreciate it, James. And I put Justin P. My last name's Pinkney out there too, but I'm not scared to show myself, but I put that in there. But it's one thing you mentioned. It just came to mind because I had a meeting earlier with some folks in my local Buddhist community,
Yeah.
and we talked about acceptance, right? And that's a hard part of a lot of things within society. But and the topics we talked about were pretty heavy, right? A lot of the discourse and society and things of that right now. But one thing that I said that I really believe is that acceptance isn't endorsement necessarily. It doesn't mean that you're a surrender. Acceptance isn't surrender and necessarily endorsement. All
Mm,
right. A lot of times it's more of an internal battle to get to that point of understanding so that you can move forward. And I've had to do that, in my journey, and we're always going to continue to have to do that.
mm. Isn't that interesting that Buddhism is more Eastern philosophy? We live in a Western culture, and in this Western culture, we are very stitched to think more combatively and more like, be resistant and acceptance maybe in the Western culture could be a sign of weakness, but in an Eastern culture, it's not the same. And I love that you are Buddhist and that you look into Eastern philosophy. I have read The Art of War,
Oh, yeah.
and I actually have taken Chinese culture courses when I was in college. So I learned a little bit about Chinese history and really about the mindset of people in the Eastern Hemisphere, not just the Chinese, but like Eastern Hemisphere, India as well, and other Asian countries. And you you learn a lot by looking at their philosophy. I would say the biggest thing you learn, or at least I have learned, really about it really teaches you how arrogant we are a little bit, how much we think bigly of ourselves, and because of that, sometimes we miss out on so much of the essence of life, so much of the little things, and so much of the things that we are grateful for. That because we're so focused on the bigger, bigger, better, more and more and more mindset of like gluttony, not just with food, but just in life. We need more. We always need more. And when you look at some of that philosophy, it teaches you more about you have everything you need, but now how do
Right.
you enjoy it, right? So I love that. And I love, The Art of War. I've actually read that to help me in my career because me being a person of color,
Yes.
trying to break into a career that's not historically had a lot of people of color. Like I actually started my career working in marketing for an Oxycontin company, and being the only person of color there, it was very challenging for me. Then and not only that, like my parents, being a person of color, you're not really given those skills on how to be defiant, how to push back against other adults. So there's always that level of wanting to be somewhat submissive when an elder or someone you perceive has authority is talking to you. And unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily work well in the corporate world because people won't see that the way you see it. They're going to see you as another person and they'll roll over you if they feel like you're submissive. So when you
Right.
And I read like The Art of War taught me more about thinking 3 steps ahead and how the war is won before it even started and how not to argue with fools and how to do things differently. So it's really it teaches you how to like take a step back and let them finish themselves, and then you don't have to worry about much. And so it really did help me earlier in my career, and I'll continue to look at books like that when I have more time. But I do love Eastern philosophy, or I
Absolutely.
should say Eastern thinking rather.
Right, right. Yeah, I do. I appreciate that, and that's true. So, and I grew up. My dad's a deacon. I grew up very much in the church, and part of that excitement and in terms of spiritual practice is rooted in that, right? To see how my parents and my grandmother and that they came with from a very I was like genuinely passionate background around that, right? So that is when I think about Buddhism in the specific sect of Buddhism that I practice is Nichiren Buddhism, right? There's a thought of the present being the only time that you can affect the past and change the future, right?
Ooh,
Right.
wow.
And so you are able to look at things in the past and view them through a different lens.
Yeah.
Herbie Hancock is one of the most well-known practitioners, and I love he does a Harvard talk, and he talks about his musical mentor in Miles Davis, and then he talks about his spiritual mentor in Daisaku Ikeda, and he talks about how Buddhism doesn't write the notes for him, but it absolutely affects the way he sees things. And so I think of it as a science of the mind, and that's why you are able. One of the cool things about this is I find a lot of folks that are. It's one of the more genuinely diverse groups, right? We'll have Zooms sometimes, and it'll be all practitioners of African descent. So
Mm,
folks from all across the globe of African descent that are practicing Buddhism. There's a book, and I always say it's I always want to preface too. It's like these are not meant to offend, right? And it's never about, for me, conversion. It's about conversation, because dialogue is a huge part of the practice.
yeah.
And there's a book, Dr. Carter, who was the reverend of one of the largest Baptist churches on the East Coast. And I think he may be retiring this year. I think connected to Morehouse in Atlanta. And he wrote a book called The Baptist Preacher's Buddhist Teacher. And he talks about his journey and how it made him stronger in his faith when he was able to apply the Buddhist philosophy to his life. So a lot of those Eastern cultures are older.
Yes.
We're young.
Yes.
We're young.
Yeah.
You can always get into like more deep, but as a planet, we're young, right?
Yes.
As a planet, we're very young. As
Yes.
a country, we're young.
Yes.
So it's almost like we forget how much we can learn from the elders, right?
Yes.
In society. And so when we do take a look back, and then there's another part of the mentor disciple relationship that we talk a lot about. And one of those things is in the West, we a lot of times we feel like when we seek out mentorship, we're losing a part of ourselves or things of that sort. Reality is the mentor's biggest goal is to have the disciples surpass them. And in the Eastern, if you interview folks and there's a book called Waking the Buddha by Clark Strand, and he interviews folks that practice in the same community that I do, folks in Japan as well as folks in the West. And when he had those conversations, folks in the East saw no separation between their mentor and disciple. It was a model.
Mm,
Sometimes it's hard for us to have that humility, like you mentioned, in the West, to reflect and to take a step back. And that when you seek out mentorship, and that goes true for business as well, that you're not giving up some of yourself. You're having to look back and through a different lens at your experiences.
yeah.
Yeah, that's like we could have a whole podcast
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah. 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 And it's funny because we were talking about football, so that football is a great example, right? New quarterback gets drafted. The
Mhm.
quarterback that's there was they're looking over their shoulder like, I don't know if I want to mentor. Like I'm not paid to mentor. I'm not, you hear like an Aaron Rodgers or somebody like that who's kind of like not that, but it's just interesting because it's a progression, right? It just like I have a son, he is I am training him to replace me one day. Like he is going to be the one that has to carry the flag for the family. It doesn't mean it just means that like there is a life cycle here, right? And
Right.
when you go back to acceptance, right? We have to accept that like death is 100% certain, right? It's a
Mhm.
100%. It don't matter if you're black, white, tall, short, medium. It's just a matter of when. Is the only uncertainty part with that. But we know that the end destination is there. We know that in the NFL, everybody has a life cycle. Some are shorter than others. You want it to be as
Mhm.
long as possible. But if it does end, that doesn't mean that life is over. It just means that this journey is over. And sometimes as people, and I myself included, we enjoy the journey we are on so much, even though we don't know what the next journey is. It could be 10x greater than what we have now. We still don't want to leave it for some reason. And again, it's something that I also struggle with. It's like there's that transition that happens like, even like okay, the Bills got a new coach. Like for me, if that
Right.
was me, I'd be like, "No." But maybe this was the purpose, right? Maybe this was supposed to happen or maybe this is just the end of that journey. It doesn't mean, but that what happens is that uncertainty becomes so heavy because we as humans have a desire to be definitive and to know with certainty everything that's going to happen next. And I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna flip it on you a little bit here. And I know we're going completely spiritual, but this is really good, so I want to keep going for a second.
Yeah.
When we think about Christianity, God, there's verses in there that tells us to lean not on our own understanding, right? But we
Mhm.
have to trust in the Lord.
Mhm.
And I would say, and the Bible talks about don't do, tomorrow's not promised, right? Bible never tells you when. It just says, look, you should live your life every day as if it could potentially be your last and continue to progress forward. But in areas where you don't understand, don't sit there and rack your brain and try to beat yourself up trying to figure it out because God ultimately knows what the final plan and the final vision is. Now that creates a moment of prayer and for spiritual alignment
Yes.
to help you get clarity. But we as people, we still reject that for some reason. That's a discussion I have with my wife all the time. There's so many of us Christians who read the Bible, we go to church, we
Mhm.
pray, blah blah blah, but yet it's like you go into the Harvard school and you're just like you're leaving all that training you just went through and just going back to default to what you know. So we do struggle as that with people, but I say all this to say that journey transition is very scary sometimes, even though it can be greater on the flip side of it. Just we don't like being uncertain. We like moving with certainty. So I don't know if in the Eastern culture or in
Yeah.
Buddhist has like a philosophy around that one, but I would
Right.
say that's a big thing that we struggle with as people.
Absolutely. That is so one of the things I talk about is the thing that connects all of us, humanity, the rich, the poor, the black, the white, no matter where you're from, is suffering. And in Nietzschean Buddhism, it talks about birth and death are two of the main sufferings. Like I think it's birth, death, sickness, and
Hmm.
aging. I think, and so when I rack that all the time because it's so often when I get fired up over these conversations when especially folks that come from a different spiritual perspective. And one of the things you always try to for me is like how do you marry the different philosophies together? And one of the things that we talk about is the mystic law, right? And that is that those things that are hard for us to understand in humans as humans that we're constantly seeking to understand,
Yeah.
which birth and death is the greatest example of that. And we are get very obsessed and fight over the beginning, how creation started, and we fight over the end and where we're going to end up. And then at the point of what you were just talking about too is one of the things is never seeking enlightenment outside of yourself. And then I always
Mm,
think about what I grew up learning about the reflection of God, right? You are a reflection of God. And so I guess one of the differences is look, and it's I can't speak for all forms of Buddhism, right? Too, I'm speaking from specifically what I learned about Nietzschean Buddhism is the idea of the all powerful. We attribute as humans, we like to attribute human traits,
hmm
right? And there is that in the law of the things that we don't understand, it's more of a force. right? More so than attributing a human factors to it, right? So when you within that like and that's what I was like, how I talk about it as a science of mind. I'm like, how is it that so many folks from different backgrounds are learn about this type of Buddhism and apply it? What is it? And I think that's part of why it is, because it is that is part of our spiritual journey, is to try
Mm,
to come to the understanding of that, and that struggle of how our ends, how our careers are going to end, how our lives are going to end, how they, how did I get here to begin with? Yeah, those thoughts, those are so coming to terms with those thoughts. And I think that at the point when you have that, that's more of you get to an enlightened point where you do start to even get more out of that journey,
mhm,
because you're no longer obsessed with those parts, because like you said, those things, like all these things I learned and then I abandon them all of a sudden when I get into this environment.
yep, yep,
Right. But then you're like, but no, this is what it's all about. Those conquering those. So that next journey that you take once you've retired as a football player and you go into business, or that next journey that you take when you've gotten laid off because AI took your job, right? And then
yeah,
you start to, learn more about the wisdom that you gain, the courage that you gain when you overcome those struggles. That's
mhm,
what they consider the treasure tower. Those jewels
mhm,
on that tower are not just jewels of joy, of great things that happen to you. They're the things that happened to you that weren't ideal.
mhm,
And by you constantly going through those and gaining more strength and wisdom consistently, then you
mhm,
really actually do start to see that within you, which I consider the reflection of God, right? Because
mm,
that's our Buddha nature. It's inherent in all human beings and all things, really,
mm,
and exists in all. And that's what. So there's a great commonality. I always say, because the mentor that I have in business is the Christian path, and I bring up a lot of that when I'm with my Buddhist community, and I say, hey, we're speaking the same similar language, but a little slightly different dialect sometimes, right?
that's cool. One thing I wanted to do too, I also wanted to close off on one point before we go on to talking more about like your background. I had an attorney on the show recently, and I'm bringing this up because you mentioned you had a friend who was an attorney.
Yes,
And we really focus the show on like, is AI going to impact, how we do things in the legal system? And when I sat down with him and I broke everything down, we went through it. I noticed that he is using AI, and to your point, AI is doing a lot of I'll say the administrative work. And what I've noticed or I observed is him transitioning to being less of someone who is doing a lot of functional work, needing to do research, look at law books to find information, help him fight this case, to more of him transitioning into being more of a advisor to the client. So what I'm noticing now is in his case, he's able to spend more time with his client and less time doing the necessary legal research. So, when I was thinking about or trying to challenge is, can AI replace an attorney? And what I noticed is and I think this is what's going to happen with AI over time. There's going to be a premium on human interaction in the future.
yes,
And I've had a couple shows, like I've talked about everything from AI's impact on dating to AI into the pulpit. And as if I had to summarize what I've learned so far, I feel like we're going to continue this AI trend. We're going to keep going up, and then there's going to be a plateau, just like anything else in life. There's going to be a point where we've reached as far as we can go. And it's not about we've reached as far as technology is going to go. It's more of we've reached as far as humans are willing to tolerate.
right,
And I feel like there's going to be a something or someone that says, I just want to see what it's like to talk to a human again. I just want to see what it's like to feel a human. And then we're going to see this AI kind of trend go down a little bit, and it's going to kind of level itself out somewhere. And when I observed him, I was just like, okay, I see what's happening here. You're offloading the busy work to AI, and you're able to make phone calls. I mean, I'm actually his former client, and he sent me a personal email for my birthday. And I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, this man's got to be busy. How does he, like, it's not one of those, like, canned emails, or it wasn't one of those emails that you just using like a MailChimp or a template and you're just plugging in names and date of births and then it just sends out like and then, no, like this man actually wrote it and I could tell because it had his signature in it and it looked like it was an Outlook message. So I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive and cool that you did that. And then after realizing, I was like, okay, he's having AI do a lot of his busy work so he can just focus more on the human to human interaction. I just thought that was interesting, and I think that that's where we're. And I just wanted to close the loop on what we were talking about earlier. Um, I want to kind of jump into like more about your background. So you were a recruiter. Can we start like, did you
Yeah.
did you always were you at 11 and your parents said, "Hey, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And you said, "I want to be a recruiter after college." Like what? How did that start?
Interestingly, my mom named me Justin because I think she saw in a book that it was like a name for like a lawyer or a judge or things like that, or something like maybe a derivative of justice or something of that sort. So, as I know that she had aspirations for me to go that route at some point. My dad had a friend that went to dental school at Howard University. And so I remember as a really young age, I had thought about wanting to be a dentist, and they had shared with me, some literature from Howard. Interestingly enough, I didn't end up going that route, but my youngest sister actually did end up being a dentist and actually went to Hampton for undergrad and Howard for dental school. So it did get to her. When you're young and your ideas of what you're going to be are kind of formulated a lot from what your parents want you to become. Where they're trying to kind of mold you because they see that as a great future for you.
Hmm.
So when I was, and it's kind of funny come to full circle because I liked technology. I wasn't great at programming things of that sort, but I ultimately ended up going into engineering at Virginia Tech. Now I remember getting into several schools, one of which was Morehouse, and I remember coming back from visiting Morehouse with my family, and at that time to go into engineering, dual enrollment with Georgia Tech, and it's a private school, and it's pretty costly. And I'd gotten into Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech for the education, there's probably for the cost is one of the best that you'll find, and probably even still today. And I had that made that decision to go to Virginia Tech, a lot based on that. And I had a great experience when I went to visit there. I had a buddy, and actually, some of my free time, I haven't done it in a while, but I learned how to the salsa dance when I was there. Enough, but so I went in full fledged thinking I was going to be an engineer. I went into computer engineering. From Southwestern Virginia. I didn't have a lot of programming in high school, so it was diving in. And I'm not, great at programming, so I did not do well. I had a really good time, in college, as a lot of folks do, but
Yeah.
I didn't, program. I wasn't very good, and so I started to kind of to make a shift a little bit. Interestingly, I had a friend that had moved into interdisciplinary studies, and in that particular field, you kind of created your own major from a couple of different minors or a few different minors. And so I had been taking courses towards, I was like, okay, I'm going to probably transfer into business or I'll go into communications. And so I literally got to my summer before my 5th year thinking to myself, if I'm going to stay in college and for 8 years, I better get a PhD or something. I got to figure something out. And so I remember going to visit one of the advisors. Because I was in engineering, I already had math and science. I had plenty of credits. I already had enough credits in communications and business for concentrations in both of those. And in my eyes, I was like, well, if you go to grad school, then you can focus in a particular area. I even thought about law school. And when they looked at what I had, they were like, well, you can actually graduate this year. I'm
What's
like,
that?
"What?" And they're like, "Yeah, you have enough credits, you basically just have to take our core classes." And the core classes in interdisciplinary studies were things like, so I went from not knowing if I was going to graduate into my 5th year to having the best senior year you can have. Pop culture, intro to acting, intro
Oh
to
man.
theater. And one of the best things that still to this day, within that program, there was a study abroad that I took to go to Senegal in West Africa.
Man.
And that's how I got my last 6 credits at Virginia Tech. I walked, and then I went to Senegal and West Africa with a group and came back and wrote a paper. And we had different professors at the University Cheikh Anta Diop do different lectures, and mine was around business. And I wrote kind of wrote about my experience. And to this day, that's one of the best things I ever did in my life. I thought at the time, as a man of color, because I had an opportunity to go to Europe, I could have gone to other places. And I
Yeah.
was like, how many times am I going to have it? And I have not yet, and I do plan on it, but I've not yet been back to Africa. But I'm like, how many times is a man of color, an African American, going to have an actual chance to go to Africa? And in Senegal, the history of Senegal and the Gambia, and we went to the Gambia too. The Gambia, I visited the Kunta Kinte's village. That was in
It's a
the
very
Gambia.
interesting country. It just kind of cuts through Senegal, right? Like it's like it goes
Yeah,
along the
it's the
Gambia.
mouth. Yeah, if it
Yeah,
looks like a big face, it's like kind of like the
yeah,
mouth or and the nose is above. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So that was an incredible experience. It's funny because they always, yeah, how I told you, through the perspective, you start to look at things in the past differently. They called me Mom Shack. They called me Mom Shack there. They're like, Mom Shack, Mom Shack. And I started to look into I just had to read down. I started to research it recently, and it says connected to Sufi, I believe, which is a form of Muslim, I think, that's very similar to Buddhist practice, and I've found as I've searched it. So it's very interesting. This was many, many years ago, but that was the name that they called me there, Mom Shack. And I always said, one day I'll maybe write a book and I'll name it like they called me Mom Shack, or something of
Wow.
that sort until that. So that was one of the greatest experiences, and I always it's helped mold me to be the person I am, for sure. And it just also goes to show you that you go through these struggles. I didn't do as well in school as I would have wanted to, go in with one idea and come out the other way. So ultimately when I landed in recruiting, I was after I worked, so right out of school, having the business background, I actually went into more banking. I was training to be a bank manager. I
Mhm.
worked in all the different areas of the bank. And I ultimately really landed at becoming a loan officer after I moved out of my college town. Because one of the things that I trained on was loans. I really kind of liked that. So when I did mortgages, that was right at the tail end of right before the big mortgage burst happened. Right. And so and I was young and dumb then too. And I still remember that day of they were having meetings all across the country because they were Conseco and then GE Money. That was back when all these different companies were buying mortgage companies. So General Electric had bought a mortgage company. So I worked for GE Money Home Loans.
Mhm.
And we had a meeting, and by the time we got out of the meeting, we were all shut out of our computers. So that was my first layoff back
Wow.
then. And I was joking when we got the email because I didn't know any difference. I'm like, I hope we all updated our resume. And a lot of folks had worked there through all the different cases of companies. And then, so they were all knocked off. For me, I was like, eh. And from that day when I've worked for a company, I've never brought in very many personal items like pictures of family and things like that. Because some part of me always said, I don't want to have a whole lot of stuff to clean up
Yeah.
if I get let go. So I had that experience early on. Right. That was when I made the shift into recruiting. After mortgages, because and one of the things with technical recruiting was more of a sales environment. I worked
Mhm.
with tech systems and high-paced environment, high-paced sales staffing environment. But you're having conversations. That's always like to talk technology. And I can, even though I may not be able to sit down and program, I can have those conversations. I can talk on those levels. So I can talk to project managers, engineer managers, developers, architects. I can talk on the same level without necessarily having to get into the weeds. So it was fun. And staffing wise is a challenge because of its being so fast paced and sales oriented. But one of the things I really, really felt like I was helping folks. I started out being one of the main telecommunications recruiters.
Mm.
And I had situations where folks, so that's a very blue collar group, even though I did ultimately end up with Dropbox where it's more white collar and high level engineers. But I still remember folks, that, may have been displaced their jobs, and I was helping to find them jobs. One guy I remember got in his van and drove his family all the way from California. Actually, I placed a few folks that came all the way from California all the way to the East Coast because they couldn't afford to live out there. And this was a long, long time ago. So now can
Wow.
you imagine how much it costs? But how thankful they were for me to help them. And I was, focused in, hitting my sales goals and getting to go to Cancun if I hit my sales goals, right?
Yeah.
And
There you
then I'm
go.
like, oh, wait a minute, I'm actually impacting people's lives positively too. So that is what helped me be able to stand that high paced recruiting for as long as I did.
Hmm.
And then ultimately went back to corporate recruiting because of my banking background. And so that's the thing. So when I worked there, one of the biggest clients that we had was a DoD data center. And we didn't have a person running that account. So even though I was a senior recruiter, I wasn't in a management position. I set up all the meetings. I met with all of the integrators. I had to, play all the sides because you didn't know who was going to win those contracts. Essentially became the biggest account. And ultimately, they never promoted me into the management position, I guess because they thought I was so good at recruiting. And then they had me train another person to become the manager and then decrease my commission. And I said to
Wild.
myself,
Wild.
and the week before I had gotten a call from Wells Fargo, a week before literally. And I was like, nah, I think things are going good. I'm not really looking. And I called the recruiter back and I was like, I'm Nate. I knew I'd get paid less, but it would be less stressful, less of a sales environment. And
Do you think that's a real thing though? Like in corporate America, from your opinion, like is that a thing where companies will literally hire someone to replace you and then have you train your replacement, then once they're trained up, they'll let you go type of thing? Is that a
Well, in that case, at least they were going to keep me in my capacity. After a while, you're kind of like, am I just running in place? But it is, I think it is common because one of the things I found when I got laid off from Dropbox was that when you looked at the job market, there were a lot less positions. Dropbox was the best company I worked. So I'll say, as far as banks go, Wells Fargo, they were great. And that's the thing. I worked at great companies. As far as staffing goes, X Systems was a great staffing company to work for. As far as banks go, Wells Fargo's is a great environment, right? I started working remote with them before working remote was a thing.
mm,
And Dropbox, they treated their employees great, but in every situation, I realized that I didn't have as much control as I thought I did. And you'll find as you get more experience, there's a pressure for you to continue to do more and get into bigger roles and take on more responsibility. You may get
mm,
a little bit more pay. Sometimes you get a bigger bump, and then the pressure is even higher. But when a company starts to look at the bottom line, have to start looking. And I know because I work, recruiting is part of human resources. When I am in meetings with Wells Fargo and I'm looking at staffing numbers and staff planning, I know what they're doing. They start looking at the highest salaries, and then they start looking at the tenure. And then they start playing, tic-tac-toe, and figuring out where the cuts are going to come from. So
mm,
if you're in a senior position, you're most definitely likely training your replacement, even if you don't realize that you're doing it, because
mm,
there'll come a point when it's more cost effective for a person that's more mid level to take on that role. And now where we
mm,
are with AI, it's becoming even more prevalent. Even so you kind of at some points you have to tell yourself that to believe your eyes. And that's not to say everyone just quit their job now. That is one of the things that I started the path I'm on now before that happened with Dropbox. And they called themselves an AI first company before it was even a thing. Now, this
mm,
was 3 or 4 years ago. There's no AI wasn't being used to the level it is now. And I
mm,
remember after we were laid off, the press release, spun it. AI first company. And I realized I was like, that's for the stockholders. And I remember
yes,
being in meetings, with where the finance person talks about these things. And you don't, at the time when you're employed by them, you look at it through a different lens. But then
yep,
once you see how things unfold, you realize where you really fall. And I had a great experience. I mean, not many folks could say that they interacted with the heads of their companies. That the head of tech systems, I remember interacting with him and he and his wife when I was in Cancun. Drew Houston is the founder of Dropbox. When we had a team offsite in San Francisco, there was a little hole in the wall, and our head of the people team took us there and ended up meeting and singing karaoke with Drew. But the music stopped. Eventually, the music
mm,
stopped, and that's not to
mm,
say that anything bad because those were great companies I worked for. But the realization is that you can work for the best mortgage company, the best bank, the best tech company, the best law firm, the best school, and you don't have as much control over the outcome as you think you do.
yeah,
You just don't, especially in this day and age.
yeah. And I think a lot of people get, and I hope that these are gems you're dropping, by the way, and I hope that these resonate well with listeners because really what it sounds like what you're saying is, you can control what you can't control, but don't take things personal. Like if you are the best performer and you may have shown up to work every day on time and stayed later, and at the end of the day, those things may not matter when it's time to make some really hard decisions, right? So keep that perspective as
Yeah.
you're going. And then also, you don't really own anything, right? And in regards to like, people, everyone at work feel, I have this is my corner. I own this and I own that. And it's like at the end of the day, like they can make a decision and completely switch everything. And what you thought you owned is now either going to somebody else or they're just company says, yeah, and we don't care for it anymore. Whatever. So
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just something that we can only control our inputs in life. That's one thing my mentor has talked about in business too, is we get so obsessed, but we can control those inputs. But, we have to recognize when those outputs are out of our control too. And it isn't about, it's a form of grief, which you go through when you lose your job and when things like that happen. And everybody deals with that differently. And so I'm also not telling anybody just shrug it off, buck up, get better. You'll see that a lot of times it's easier for folks to, if you're out there and you're trying to build a business online and you're posting about your life and what happened, there'll be a person that'll tell you, well, I had this and this and happened. Just get over it. Right. I'm not telling you that it's not okay to have those feelings. It is actually part of the process. You should have those feelings and it's completely okay to do that. But then you want to, get to that realization. To fact that I was replaced by AI, I would say I was anti-AI because I'm a technology, guy. So I really like that. But I couldn't look at it for a while. Yeah, like I couldn't look at my computer for a
yeah,
minute. I just, because it was hard. The computer, one of the computers I have, Dropbox gave me.
yeah,
The cup I'm drinking out of right now still has Dropbox on it. I
yeah.
look at it differently now, but so it's okay to have those feelings. And also, the one of the things I try to impress upon people is that start now. You don't have to wait until the decision's made for you. Now,
Mm,
you might not have control over that. The decision might get made for you, but that does you still that doesn't mean it's too late either. But
yeah,
making decisions, that set you up. Because when I got laid off, but I joked, said I told my parents, of course, they knew I got laid off, but I said, my mom, I was mad. I was like, you know what? I'm retired. I retired. My mom's like, what? You can't retire? And I'm like, well, and I said, we're in, and being in the recruiting world and having contract, I started to see, and I was like, now when you look at a full-time job, I almost have to look at it as a 3 to 5 year contract
yeah.
in real terms, right? So for me, it was like at some point, now you'll see the saxophones behind me. I play music and I enjoy that and I gig, and I've gotten paid for that, but I never wanted that to be my sole thing because I didn't want it to take the joy out of it. But, one of those things is you really have to get to that point where you have to make those changes.
It goes back to acceptance, what you were talking about before.
Exactly.
It's funny when you say it because, like, it's so much easier when you accept something versus when you try to pretend like, hold on, lost focus. 1 second. Sorry.
All right.
Technology, man. Okay. Not that one. Ugh, we are back. Sorry about that.
I can hear you now.
Okay. And we're back. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. But I think I had lost my train of thought a bit on that. But what I was saying in terms of obviously after I told my parents I had gotten, uh, laid off, is that, since we have to look at everything as more like a 3 to 5 year contract now,
Yeah.
I knew there was going to be things that I would have to do. Our parents' generation knew that you could work 30 or 40 years and retire,
Yeah.
and then you were going to be good. You really wouldn't have to work much anymore. We don't. I don't think that exists anymore. I don't think that the system as it is really set up for that. So we have to find avenues that are going to produce value that are less taxing on us mentally
Yes.
and on our body, that can grow assets that'll grow and continue to feed our what we want to do in terms of how we want to live. So I was like, yeah, you can always go back and get a job. The worst thing that can happen is you go back and you get another job. Your likelihood of you getting paid what you're getting before might not be the same, but you have to start figuring out at some point what you're going to do after the music stops or after it happens, because it's inevitable. Like you said, you don't endorse it or necessarily have to like it, but once you can accept it and you can start making those decisions that help you get to that point, because I think that we'll always have some form of work, some type of thing that we'll be doing to produce value or produce income
Hmm.
as we get older in life, something that
Hmm.
we can physically and mentally sustain.
Yeah, agreed. And for me, I actually have gone through a layoff experience. I worked for a company called Pitney Bowes. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They make
Yeah,
the
I remember
machines.
them. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, uh, this was my first product manager role. I was like, I thought I made it. Like, it felt amazing. I felt important. I had really great pay, and like, I was getting into about month three, started to find a groove. I was making decisions. Life was great. Okay. Then one day there was a meeting put on my calendar, a very like, hey, let's have a one-on-one. And it wasn't necessarily with my direct boss, it was with my boss's boss. So I go to the one-on-one and I'm thinking like, oh, okay, I remember I had it on my calendar. I remember I go to my boss. I was like, hey, you want this? Oh, just, maybe probably just status update. Oh, okay. So I remember I went home that night, making sure everything, all my notes are good, got it ready to give a status update. And she's like, oh, I booked us a room instead of my office. I said, okay. So I'm just following her. I'm just like in my own mind, I'm just like, yeah. So I was thinking about this. And then I remember I cut the corner and we go into there, and there's a lady sitting at the desk, and she's got her laptop, and like there's a folder here and there's a folder there. She's like, "Oh, James, can you please have a seat?" And I go, "Oh, okay. Is everything okay?" Like there's
hmm,
you could just feel the energy is not. This is I'm early 20s, my first time ever going through this. And they're saying, today's going to be your last day of employment here. And it was like, just, went right into it. Again, I'm not familiar with that, but my first thought is, did I do something wrong? Like, you
right,
just feel like it's you.
yeah,
And I think the worst part about it is when they can't really tell you anything other than, well, no, it's not. It's just a decision that was made. But
yeah,
I'm 20 something years old. Help me out, like, cause I need to understand, like, if there's something. So you're sitting there, and I remember I was so numb, and as she's talking, everything's going in one ear out the other, and I'm just thinking about like, what could I have done? Like, what could I have done wrong? What could I have done to avoid? Like, I just had that moment where I'm just racking my brain, and I'm not even really fully comprehending what she's saying. I'm just kind of like, wow. And I remember they were like, okay, you have your 2 weeks pay. And I remember, I shed some tears because it just felt like reject. It felt like you did something wrong. It felt like rejection. It felt like it just, all of the negative stuff kind of overwhelmed me. And I remember just, you go into like kind of like damage control in a way. Like I remember they gave me some time to kind of like, gather my belongings and say my goodbyes. So I went around and I was telling people like it's my last day, and then people were like, hey, you should talk to the sales team. They may be looking for people. And I got an opportunity. They were like, hey man, if you want a sales opportunity, it's here for you. And I just remember taking that, and I said, you would think like, okay, you got job security, you get something like, you get some kind of job security. And I just remember feeling like it's not me though. Like I can
yeah,
do it, but it's not going to feel right. So I remember I just took it home and I just waited. I didn't, and this is before I really became more spiritual. So I'm really leaning on my own right
yeah,
now.
yeah,
I'm making decisions on my own. I'm not seeking God. I'm not seeking no mentor. I'm not seeking any kind of advice.
yeah,
And I just remember just rejecting the offer. No job, just didn't know I couldn't do it. And I just said, I'm gonna roll the dice. And I rolled the dice, and I remember I eventually got another job. But to your point, when I got the other job, the whole like, I'm gonna put my family photos in the cubicle, and I can't wait to update my LinkedIn. That it does change you a little bit. Like you go from, this is great, I can't wait to retire here, to like, this is temporary. And where I'm tying this all back to is to like, and I'm probably not gonna be able to let this go. Like I'll be talking about acceptance for a while around my house a little bit,
oh
because
yeah,
that's really a good point that you brought up. But I didn't concede anything. I
right,
accepted that this is the new way. And because I accepted, I was actually happier, right?
yeah,
But I didn't feel like I gave anything up. I just felt like I'm not going to do that, because I know that every job we have is temporary. So why get comfortable, or like when I go to hotels, I'm one of those people who don't even unpack their suitcase. Okay. Like
right, yeah,
I wanna do, like I've seen people like I'm like, "You're going through all this, like, we're just here for, like, 2 days, and you're
You're
putting stuff in
right.
storage." I just live out of my suitcase, so, like,
I'm the
I'm that
same
type of
way.
person. I just accept that, like, I'm not here long term, and I know the place is nice, but I'm not here long term, so that's what I've except and I feel like, you're spot on. And that's the other thing too, like dealing with my own friends and telling them I got laid off and like they can't comprehend that this happens in their minds and my family mind. When you explain to them like, hey, you got laid off, they assume that you did something wrong. Very similar to Job in the Bible. Job went through some stuff. People assume that you must have done something wrong. No, it just happened to me. And that's the same thing. So also going through that painful experience of people kind of like maybe even doubting you a little bit or kind of like I
Mhm.
don't know, and because I actually got laid off twice in a very short period of time. So it's like when you go through it twice, then like fair enough. People are gonna start to think like, dude, like what's going on here, right? But it was just circumstantially that's what happened to me. So I can relate to your story very well since I've also been laid off, and it's tough, but it does put you in a position where it makes you start thinking about the future, which is what I will talk to you about next. Is like, okay, so you went through the layoffs and everything like that, but it seems like you kind of developed this mindset of like, I'm gonna move with the water here a little bit, and I'm going to prepare myself to go down that river. I'm not just gonna, I'm gonna float and let the river take me, but I'm also gonna be ready for if something happens, right? So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
You moved on to something new and you said, I'm making an assumption here. I'm assuming that once that happened to you at Dropbox, you said, I'm not going to let that happen again. And now here's what I'm going to do
Right.
to avoid that. Is that a fair
That
statement?
that's true. That's true. And it's interesting when you talk about Job because the the time period that happened started to align with when I really started to dive into my practice. And one of the things in so my not specifically my spiritual mentor, but my business mentor talks about God's plan and and I say that sometimes like there's a plan, right? But he also says that just because there's a plan doesn't mean it's going to be easy. One of the things in Nietzschean Buddhism is karma's not fixed. So I consider when I talk about that marriage, but when I think about the plan or God's plan, to me that's karma, and karma's not fixed. It is every cause and everything that we do changes the next moment,
Hmm.
and so it was interesting how that kind of aligned, and I started to look at things differently. And three pillars of the practice, right, is faith, practice, and study. And I started to lean into the things that I did well and look at them a little bit differently. And I tried to focus in on the things that really I had excitement about. Investing was one of those things. And I will get into to different types of investing too, because obviously you can go into that a lot of times too. I always liked the decentralized nature of Bitcoin and things of that sort,
Mm,
and decentralized finance and things of that sort. So I started to get some education in those areas, and because I had been told so long that that's not this and that, and or that's dangerous this and that, and I started thinking about my own experiences, and I'm like, well, let me learn more about this. And let me really dive into that. And then I started looking at things that like I said, I started to get into real estate right before I left Dropbox because it was one of the best jobs I ever had. I was able to acquire a duplex right next door to me, or actually that was my first place. My neighbor next door, I was able to acquire that. And I started looking and I started thinking about how I was so close to the hospital, and the corporate housing market started to kind of come along, right? So I'm
okay.
looking at these things, right? Guys coming along. So a lot of stuff that seems way outside of yourself starts to look like more in reach.
Yeah.
But you go into this period of consuming, to shake it off. You're like watching YouTube all the time. You're watching doing this and that, and you don't. But then if you have to break that cycle too, if sometimes that consumption, you fool yourself into thinking you're doing research. I was looking the other day. I have a list in YouTube. I would save things. I have over 118 videos that in that
Wow.
list about businesses, right, and
Yeah.
startups. I tried doing MRR. Right? I hired a virtual assistant in India, and try to do this, try to have them log in and drop ship. And I even started to try to do some marketing, which I ended up abandoning part of it because I was going through so many different things. But then as I started to reflect, and AI, it was a big part of once I got over that resentment, because one of the things you talked about before too, the anger, right? That we have, that acceptance is a part of coming to the terms of realizing that you're hurting yourself more. When
Yeah.
for one, AI doesn't have any soul, for one, that you're gonna hurt, right? It can't feel that hate. If you're angry at your old boss, or you're angry with any person, right? Even in your personal life, they can't feel that. But you're feeling it. It's hurting you more if you think about
Yeah.
it. So that's part of coming to those terms. And so when I and I remember like, getting this education and taking a script, right? And sitting down with Claude and creating this whole executable plan and project. Started figuring out how to use the projects the proper way, and the knowledge bases, the instructions, and then this form of clarity came across. And then I realized, I tell people all the time, it's like, so you're searching for this business all the time, and sometimes you realize that you have a business, you're just doing a terrible job running it. A lot of those skills are, that whole saying, for seek alignment outside of yourself. That a lot of that stuff is right there. And one of the roles in AI now is that it can help pull that out and help give you clarity,
Yeah.
right? And that was what I started to happen. So I started to be able to create um streams of income out of what I already had. And then every month that I was able to survive, I got more courage.
Mm.
I created a dashboard to manage business funding, and I went through a process of getting business funding to help rehab the duplex to create that corporate housing business, right?
Bravo.
I started learning how to take through AI, creating dashboards and understanding the risk, right? I'm able to understand what I have at my disposal to invest, and I'm able to take emotion out of it, right? Because when you're just getting, let go, and you're going and you're chasing all these different things, you're going out and you don't learn about the role of volatility. And
Yeah.
it can be your enemy when you don't understand it. But folks that are options traders understand that volatility is your friend, right? One of the folks that I learned from came from an options background. And I'm able to take what, you're able to, so you should, this isn't to replace seeking good mentorship, but you can enhance it. Because I can take a project, and instead of feeling like I need to call this coach all the time, I have a version of them right there, because I've taken the lessons and I've created and I've built out a project, and that project's gotten better because I've added to it as I've learned things. So that's where it really all began. And then because there, when we see folks and I self-admitted social media hater. I stopped posting social media a lot for personal things. It's even hard for me to promote my own band and music on.
Yeah. You know.
That's things changed. I had to I consulted with these guys and coached folks on liquidity provision and decentralized finance for a year. And within that community, I started to see how communities were run and things of that sort. And then I started to learn. Well, through helping others, you start to that's that oneness of a mentor and disciple coming through. I had so many
Mm.
people tell me how much I was able to affect them when they were spending that hour a week with them, and showing them what I was doing with my AI projects, and helping that apply that to their investments. And so you gain more courage and you gain more confidence. When we look online, we're seeing a lot of the finished product of folks.
Yes.
We're
Yes.
seeing a lot of the finished product. They'll talk about their struggles a lot of times, but even in that, it's in a
Yeah.
refined way, because now they're at a point where they've got folks running their content. They've
Yeah.
got the great footage and this and that, and so it still sometimes feels distant. And so what we have to understand is that, think about where you're working, and think about what your profession is, and think about how long it took you to get good at that. Right? We are willing to go and put that time into getting good at a job for another company, but we're not willing to take the bumps And you think if you took 10 years, and you don't have to with AI right now, and in 3 to 5 years, in no business, like think about a restaurant. How many restaurants or companies that you know? I have a buddy whose dad's owned a business, and he said, I don't know. The business is running for years. I don't know if they've ever been cash flow positive. He said, talking about his
Yeah,
dad, we have this false sense of idea of money until we actually force ourselves to manage it. And AI helps with that, like business funding, how to manage the flow of cash flowing between your business and your personal, how that whole works. Because then once you see that and you have success at it, you start to understand that it's not outside of you, that you have that ability too. And then, and you over time get better and better at it. And so that's where AI was able to come in and provide a lot of clarity and now provide a lot of conviction for me as I build this out. And as you create other forms of income that comes along. And now that's what I'm doing a lot is sharing that process of those systems that have helped me, essentially for folks to have that same experience, to be able to have those early breakthroughs that give them the confidence to move on. But there's like I said, we always pull from the philosophies. There's the idea of the world is like a painting, right? There's 5 components, right, that build our painting, right? And a lot of it is what our senses bring in information, right? So every day, you hear, you see on TV, your parents, everything tells you how this professional environment's supposed to go. And then that starts to take a certain form, right? So you start to build mental images of this life, right? Oh, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a lawyer. I have to do this and that, right? And that's how your perception kind of takes those things in. And then volition, right, is the action. So when you start to take action on those things, that becomes the reality, right, that you
hmm
have, right? Every
yeah,
day getting up, doing this and that, right? Because you've taken action on those. And how many of us have had nightmares about work? We wake up,
yeah,
right? That's is evidence of your conscious, right? Your consciousness. Those images are now in your consciousness. That's now your reality, right?
yeah.
So you've taken action on those things. So the way to kind of break that loop is being able to take actions that it's kind of like the matrix, right? Those are the actions that you do that outside of that loop. And then
hmm
you start to see through what a term in Buddhist philosophy is the deluded world. A
mm
deluded world, right? It can be applied to a lot of different aspects, but as I see it now, the way that we look at work, and like I said, this is not to say someone you just abandon your job, right? Immediately, but you start to have a perspective and understanding. But the only way that you can ultimately get to that point is taking action over and over again. And the business mentor talks about it all the time. It's like the things that we do over and over again. Steph Curry shoots thousands of threes. I talked about it, depending on a person's age, they may not relate to this, but do you remember Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? That
Okay.
the sky hook. And then you being James Worthy, you probably
Yeah.
you probably get that a
Yeah.
lot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But that hook, was unstoppable. How many times did he shoot that hook? That boring shot over and
Yeah.
over and over again.
Yeah.
But it was unstoppable. At some point, he had the more points than anybody in the NBA, right? So getting to the point where you're able to take those shots, take those actions over and over again, you build that courage, you build that wisdom, you build that conviction, and it stacks on top of each other. And it won't be an easy road the entire time, but every time you have success, it's going to add to that stack. And then you'll look back and like I said, AI can play a great role in this because we don't have the memory. It's easy we can forget, right? We can get attached to things and we can lose things. So when you have an ally, when you're able to, I always tell folks how, you walk around with all these thoughts all the time, and how now when I look at my approach to building systems with AI, it's an extension of my inner thoughts. It's simplest form to bring clarity from that to build out actionable plans that I can execute so I can start to see these changes. And it's becoming more. I spent this weekend staying up way later than I could because I'm building a Claude bot, right? I set one up and talk about connection issues. I got to the point where I was about ready to go and then the server went down cloud
Mm.
wise. And I was like, well, you know what? You talk about how you learn through that process. I realized through that I had worked with someone to do a server set up to kind of take that out. And then I still had my Dropbox laptop that I use here and there. And I realized I just did 2/3 of that. All I have to do is set up the security property, and I can do that. I proved to myself. And guess who led me through? I worked with Perplexity and AI, and to lead me through that process of setting it up. And I was able to take some education from one place where a person did a 3-hour lecture on setting up Claude bots. And then the community that set up these cloud servers, they also had some education that wasn't quite is user friendly. And so I was able to create a product and get the best of both worlds, create an executable plan. And then that's what that's what I spent my Saturday night this week doing, was doing that. So, I just want people to understand that I'm not special or different than them. I just started to get a little bit more clarity, and I was able to use AI to help me get to that point.
Got it. Got it. So let me know if this is a fair thing to say. So for how you help people, you kind of mentor them and you show them how they can leverage AI to reach whatever goal they have. Right? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the first part of that is taking all of the stuff that is jumbled up in our heads, and getting a clear pulling that out, right? And getting a clear picture of that. For some folks it might be as simple. So they may have some business that they're trying and they're flailing away in, and this helps get that going in the right
Mm-hmm.
direction. For some folks, maybe they recognize a skill that they have that they didn't realize they had, that translates into business. The digital space is a 350 billion dollar industry as far as,
Mm-hmm.
like, online education and things of that sort. I was looking at someone the other day. They said that their first business, they had created a business around helping folks take care of their feet.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and so part of it is we just don't see it ourselves. We see something completely outside of ourselves, and part of it is helping to get to that point where you have that confidence to know that you can. And like I said, you don't have to wait until my hand was forced. Luckily, I had started before that because I saw the future where I was like, okay, I'm gonna I want to get into real estate, and I'm going to do this and that. That's why I say you don't want to have to wait until your hands forced necessarily. But even if you gotten laid off and you start looking for another job, understanding that the next phase, put as much time into you and building your assets and building what you can do alongside what you're doing with that business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you may be surprised. You may get to the point where you're self sufficient.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. Um It's funny that it was put in my spirit to start podcasting earlier this year. And the big reason why is I want to have dialogue in the conversations about not problems of tomorrow, but like how can we skip and think about 2030, for example, and just let's because here's how I see things. We've historically speaking, technology has always changed things, right? That's nothing new. The one thing though that I'll use as an example is let's take the automobile. Okay, that's technology that came out, and when the automobile came out what did it do? It replaced the need for a stagecoach driver. Okay. Now, what do we do with the stagecoach drivers? They didn't take them out back and shoot them. They actually became limousine drivers, right? Or chauffeurs or taxi cab drivers. However, with technology, it created new problems because what happens when, which someone probably wasn't thinking about at the time? Great, we got all these new cars, but now someone crashed Mr. Ford's car into a home. And now that person used their life savings to pay for that vehicle, and there was no thought for, oh, what if I crash this car and someone gets injured, or who's now going to pay for all this? Then someone says, I have an idea. It's
Yeah.
called insurance. I'd like to create a $1 billion industry. So, and then we saw, okay, insurance. Then, well, guess what? Now we need someone to maintain the roads that these vehicles are driving on. Okay, construction jobs. So I do feel like that can potentially be the future where it's like we're solving something, but it's gonna create a branch of all new things to be solved. And I think that with what you are talking about in your mentorship, you will be able to help people figure out, take what's in your toolbox and let's put it on the table and see. Like, you ever see Apollo 13, the movie Apollo 13?
Yes, yes,
Remember that
love that.
scene where they just came and dumped everything on the table and they said, "All right, guys, we got to fit this thing in this box and do it only using this." And they figured it out. So I feel like we're kind of in that, or going towards that as a society, going to that Apollo 13 moment where here's everything here. We got to figure it all out. And I feel like the more we accept that that is what's going to happen, we don't have to worry about waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and then like, oh my gosh, I got to figure this out. It's like, let's start putting together now. And that's really where my mindset was, right? Like, let's not wait for the Houston we have a problem moment. Let's start contingency planning now and thinking about, okay, this new automobile's out on the road. Something is going to go unexpected because that's just what happens. There are mathematically so many different scenarios that can happen from, you talked about the output, right? There's an output and there's so many things that can happen from that output. Let's start brainstorming those outputs now and thinking about like what could potentially happen. So like, even for me, I start, just brainstorming on the podcast too with people and like let's think about a problem. And one podcast I was talking with a friend, or actually one podcast I was talking about, okay, like we know that we can send, social media right now, there are these tools and features that allow you to really clean up what you're writing. The problem I see with that is, and I've seen it even in the comments, is that it's no longer human. Because if you have a personal relationship with me, you know that that's not how I talk. And AI is going to clean it up as best as it possibly can for the mass audience, but it's not going to be authentically James.
Right.
And even in my emails for work, it feels a little weird when I use that feature to polish and I see the message it writes, and it's like, it's very perfect. The problem is, how are my peers going to look at me when they're like, dude, you don't use, can you even spell,
Yeah.
can you even spell that word that you put in your email? Like, you don't talk like that. So I think that's where, that's an example where I feel like there's going to be a fatigue that's like, you're going to be looking at comments. Well, I concur with the statement. You're going to be like, this ain't real. Like, who are these people? So I feel like there's going to be that moment where, simple things like that, people are going to be like, yeah, I just want the human, right? I feel like there's also going to be moments where, and I was also brainstorming even like with dating, right? Like, we're going to need people to build new dating apps in the future, in my opinion, that restrict your ability to use AI as an assistance because it's going to force you to be the main character here. And then we also talked about how, with dating, as technology is evolving and everything like that, what if we flip things upside down, right? We have dating apps now, like called Tinder, where
Right.
the whole premise of Tinder is you are making a judgment without context. So I'm judging you based on your physical appearance. And what if we flipped it and said that you have to judge the context of the person first before the physical? You don't even get a chance to see what they look like until and we came up with this like Love is Blind, very similar to the show concept, where
Right.
you are literally just forced to review the person's, background, their history, see if there is an alignment there, and if there is, then we go on to the next step. And then we see if there's a physical alignment, because I strongly feel even when we use AI to do the research, there's so much more of a stronger connection when you've aligned um on the non-physical and the non-superficial aspects first. So for people who really want a lasting relationship, you're gonna have to take this route. And I'm just giving that as an example because that is an example of where AI is fixing a lot of things, but then it's also creating new opportunities in a sense
Yeah.
where we got to maybe date differently. We've got to communicate on social media differently. How do we keep things as humanized as possible? There's a problem that we are going to have to solve, which is where I look at that and I say, "Ooh, opportunity.
True.
Let's play with that. Let's poke at that a little bit more." We may already have the tools in our own toolbox to go after that. So those are some of the things I'm exploring. I'm also exploring travel too, right? Like all the, if you've taken a flight, you know all the friction points with travel, right? Why does it have to be that hard? And then
Yeah.
also when it comes to, you know, uh airline travel, can we make checked baggage a thing of the past? Can we do that? can there are, there are companies out there that ship your luggage for you, right? Why do we still need to carry it on to the airport? And how can we get to more of a different algorithm where it's not just based on price alone, but it's based on all the other factors that go involved with traveling that people don't think about?
That's
There's
true.
there's a lot of great fruit that can come from AI. I think to your point, it's about us accepting that things are going to look different in the future. We can accept the truth. Sorry, we can accept the fact, but the truth of it is, even though social media will paint a doom. So the fact is, look, jobs are going to be lost, things are going to change, etc. Now, the truth of it all is, there's also going to be a lot of opportunities that are created. The truth of it all is, you don't have to be so doom and gloomy about it, because if you think progressively now, regardless of the fact that it's happening around you, it doesn't have to have the same impact on you if you accept what's happening.
True. That's true. And regardless of the truth is it's changing, right?
Yes.
No matter whether what you do, the change is happening, and the change has always happened. It's what we go through. The earth is constantly changing and shifting and things of that. So
Yes.
that
Yeah.
change is something that we have to look at. And something you talked about too when you talked about the urgency around of utilizing and accepting and things of that sort is urgency doesn't have to look like panic, and
Yes. It doesn't.
it doesn't have to be frantic either, right? Urgency just means a recognition that emotion that things need to go in motion necessarily. So, and you're right, there's a lot of change, the way that there's going to new opportunities are going to come along, right? It's the way that we consider human, like your example with the lawyer, right? And I talk about sometimes too, the physical things that have happened. So I had a blood clot,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
I saw
that
that.
years ago, found hard stop at my growing. I was actually going to a different doctor, just a sleep doctor, and they happened to be a friend. And they were like, "You should. I'm going to call your doctor right now. We're going to scan you right now because it had been happening for a couple of weeks." And they found that. And then I go to a chiropractor regularly, and she's like, "That's your new birthday now." Because that's so many really healthy people that happens to, and that they don't wake up the day, because the blood clot just continues through. And so when that's part of the reason the time freedom has become so important, and why after Dropbox, one of the great things about that company was they gave us a lot towards our wellness. So I was able to lean into that. That was part of their benefits is encouraging you for wellness. So that time became important, and I valued it a lot differently looking at it then. And I talk about different instruments, so acupuncture, things of that sort, and the working that along with Western medicine together. Interestingly enough, I went to and my acupuncturist, one of the folks I see, they check your pulse every time. And they said, do you realize you have a regularly irregular heartbeat? And I'm saying this and I'm just like, if my parents see this podcast, I never even told them about this story. So if they see this, they'll be wondering,
Yeah.
why do you tell me? But it's not, it's something that's very common. But it was interesting to me that the Eastern medicine found that. I mean, all of us have things like, oh, I feel like my heart skips a beat here and there. But they measuring my pulse got that. When I went and saw my regular doctor appointment, they checked the pulse and things and they didn't see it. And then they took me up to an EKG and they were like, in that 10 seconds, your heart beat ahead. One time during that 8 to 10 seconds. And so I did like wear a monitor for a minute just to see how long I'm still going to get how many times that happens because if it happens over a certain amount of times, right, then in the future that could because like I'm in the best shape of my life. So I don't want the people to be doom and gloom right now. Cholesterol's great, everything. That's why they were so perplexed because, every test that you imaginable you see looks perfect. But
Mm.
yet, when you look at the EKG, that was ahead. So interestingly, Eastern medicine caught that. I go to the doctor every year before I've gone for years. Western
Mm.
medicine. So what the reason for that story is that you made me think about that because of what you talked about with your lawyer friend. The way that things are approached, the time taken with the person is more because AI is doing the stuff that's distracting you from paying attention. So you may have a merge of it becomes no longer Eastern medicine or Western medicine. It's medicine. And they work together for the right now it's up to us to be like if I don't do that and go get the Eastern medicine and still go to my doctor for the Western medicine, I'm the person that has to orchestrate that connection. But perhaps that's where we're heading towards, where these philosophies that sometimes seemed like they butted head throughout history now actually work in sync. And perhaps AI is what helps open the door for that to happen. That, I was thinking to myself, well, why aren't folks having these scans done more often? How are these things, why do we, in the West, we're more reactionary and wait for things to happen, and it's a lot more preventative, in the East, what I found. And so that is part of the reason I say the urgency for getting your time back, I think should be there, not waiting until you get to a point of panic or you have to
Yeah.
do things because
Yeah.
that choice has been taken from you. So that's what made me think about that too. And I want to give a shout out to my dog Apollo too, because you talked about Apollo 13.
Apollo. Yeah,
And it reminded me,
Apollo.
I've got a 13-year-old
Shut up,
shepherd
Apollo.
mix laying behind me. Now I had a dog in college named Zeus. So the predator, the next in line was Apollo. A lot of people
Got
think
you.
Apollo Creed though, or I've had, when I was setting up my Clawbot, I named it Apollo as well. And it immediately gave me an emoji of a rocket. And I was like, well, actually, as I'm talking to my AI assistant, I'm like, actually, you're named after my 13-year-old shepherd. And it's interesting because it's like, oh, in that case, it adapts its personality. So it's like, so loyal and protective. I'll be loyal and protective. So it actually adjusted its, we were storing as its brain more or less based on
Mm,
that fact. It's sometimes I'd watched a podcast like years ago, and it was a Buddhist monk, and they asked him about his thoughts on AI as things were starting to come up. And he said it may be we'll re-examine what it's like, or what it is to really be human. Maybe it'll force
mhm.
us to reflect and actually think about that more. And the humanity can come out in those professions where maybe it's not been there in like you said, maybe when you're talking to your lawyer, you're talking to your doctor, your things that where that humanity, the piece of the humanity that may not be there anymore, maybe AI gives us that opportunity for that to come back. And those connections are always going to be there. Like you said, the way dating and things that's affected, the way social media and things like that, how people interact, what do they say? Into your DMs and things like that. I didn't even know
Yeah.
what that meant for the longest time, And so the way we communicate, maybe we get back to a different way of communication
Yeah.
that may end up being healthier for us in the long run.
But that could be true. And by the way, you heard about the Artemis mission to the moon?
I did hear I've actually been meaning to read more about that. Yeah, that's pretty
So
cool.
they named it Artemis because Artemis is the twin of Apollo.
Yes, and that's someone actually that's a couple weeks ago we were talking because my parents. So I'm not married. I don't have any kids, and so my mom knows Apollo's 13 years old, and it's funny because they're not dog people. And my sister, she was like, he's the only big dog I'm not scared of. My nephew and
Hmm.
niece love him, and I have friends. They're all encouraging me to get a second dog, and I'm like, I don't know. I don't think I would. And someone was saying like, you should get a dog, and then if I the next dog, if I ever, because I've never had a female dog, perhaps Artemis is the next in
Artemis.
line.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. If you got, I mean, you might, you started, you might as well keep going.
Exactly.
And I agree with you. The thing is, like, I do think AI will force us. I also heard, I've heard CEOs float the idea that AI will put us in a position in the future where we will have 3.5-day work weeks, right? So the 5-day work week was a thing. I don't remember who did, if it was Rockefeller or Ford. I think Ford may have been the one who came up with the 5-day work week at 40 hours a week, right?
Yeah.
That could also be a thing of the past, right? We could be a society where, working is a Monday through Wednesday thing. Um, and you're getting back more time to spend with your family. Now, with that said, I do think that, and even the Bible tells us to do this, you got to have multiple streams of income, right? You may see things collapse a little bit more at your primary job, and maybe people are working, 3 to 5, 3 to 5 at job A, 3 to 5 at a job B, or 3.5 at my corporate job, and then I'm spending the rest of my time doing my side hustles, right? Like this could all change, right? That the whole like idea of just I'm gonna, we saw the shift, right? Like my generation, generations ago, as you said, you're gonna go work for company A, and guess what? You're gonna have a white picket fence, you're gonna have a single family house, two-car garage, and you're gonna be with them for about 30 years, and then you're gonna retire, and then you're gonna get a pension,
Mm-hmm.
and
The
you're
story
just
was
gonna
already
like
written for us, right? The story was
it was
already
already.
written.
But then it changed, changed. And now for me, it's like, yeah, you're not gonna get Social Security, dude. You better, you better, you
Yeah.
better have a plan, brother.
Yeah, that's the truth.
So for my generation now, it's like, and by the way, millennials, I mean, we're I feel like we've gone through a lot. I'm not taking anything from any other generation, but like, man, like we haven't had like a good 5 year stretch without something. It's like
Yeah.
my generation, okay, most of us graduated between, I want to say, what, 2008 and 2012, right at the heart of the financial crisis in the United States. Came through that. We had a nice run between maybe 2012 in 2019. Then we got COVID. Now we're on the brink of world wars.
Yeah.
Just we need a couple of years to just take a break. I think from my generation, our retirement is going to look very different than what we thought it was going to be in school. I'm talking about grade school. Think we also have a thing where the birth rate's dropping with us. The birth rate's dropping because we don't have time to make babies, and we can't afford it.
And we're scared.
Right?
Yeah. There's a lot of fear around that too. As I've gotten older, and that's what I think about too, because I'm not envious of, as I have two sisters, right? An
Hmm.
older sister and a younger sister, and there's a lot of pressure on our females because of the time clock, right?
Yeah.
As a male, you don't. I'm very cognizant of that. You have guys that are like in their 60s and stuff that end up having kids and stuff. And so, it's something you don't think about, but a part of that is that fear of like, there's a responsibility that comes with that. And you want to be able to provide the best life possible. So, unfortunately, for folks, that's a very serious thought process for folks regardless of their age, right? That spans generations, when you're in your 20s to folks that are in their 50s and 60s, in terms of expanding your family. It's sad that that is something we have to think about because of that fear. And so, yeah, I know exactly what you mean there.
Yeah. It's it's brutal. And by the way, Al Pacino had a baby at 80, so you
There you
you've
go.
got you really don't have to worry about time.
Yeah, that's true.
And you could be in the home, and you could be in hospice care, like you got 10 days left. You could still pop one out if you wanted to. So,
That's true. And so in AI, that some of the medical advancements that are coming, and I can't
yes.
remember the doctor I saw, and I talked about how I consume much less now, but I still find time to see some of these podcasts. But what they're able to do as far as um, is accelerating research on the causality of aging. And
Hmm.
they've been able to in labs in rats add an extra, let's say the extra 100%, but that's 100% of from where they were, right? So let's just say if they technically had 2 more years that they would live that would make them the average age, then they were now able to live 4 more years. So
Got you.
what they talk about is that in our lifetime, having that as something that you literally would be able to take a pill and it basically delays your aging process. So the people will be living. There may be some folks that just continue to live a lot longer, right? So there's a lot. That's why I also say that there's the urgency of taking care of ourselves, and why I do look at the Eastern and Western medicine and take advantage of both sides, because I don't want to get to now. My grandmother, she's 94. Like we have some good genes, but if you get to that
Yeah.
point and then you're stuck at that age
Yeah.
for a long time, you want to be in the best version of yourself as possible at that point.
Yes. 100%. Speaking of aging, do you know who Neil deGrasse Tyson is?
Oh, yes, yes, I like Neil deGrasse. Uh-huh.
So he actually had a good talking point on this about, one of the beautiful things in life is we don't know when we're going to die, but we know that we're all going to die at some point, right? So there's no idea of infinite life. And he says one of the beautiful parts about that is it forces us to live every day like it can be our life. We have to treat our life with a level of value because imagine the thought process if you just knew you had 500 years. The procrastination that
Yes.
would happen.
Yeah.
Like I got 300 years. Like why do I gotta do this right now? So
Yeah.
it's like
That's so
it would
true.
totally change. Um, I think, a lot of us probably wouldn't have gotten married. Like, we'd probably just wait till about 105 to 120, maybe to even get married. Like things would just shift and like people would move slower. And like we move with urgency now because we don't know. And we move with urgency because we kind of also understand that life has an expectancy of about X. Um, and we're all kind of in a way in the back of our mind chasing X, and we're like, all right, well, I got to get this done before X happens. That's why it kind of paces us a little bit, but
Right.
it would be interesting to see what would happen. I'm telling you right now, if they come out with an aging pill and I can take, listen, I'm sitting on my couch for a couple, I'm just,
Yeah, you
I'm
might
chilling
not
for a
rush.
couple
You
years.
might not rush at that point. You're like, wait a minute.
I
But
got, I got, I got 30 years to get this done. That's all right.
that project, I always joke that I have a laptop filled with like halfway done AI projects. Imagine
No,
what it'll look
no,
like. That well, I'll get to it.
yeah. But I also think people would probably just enjoy life more because you're not in a rush, you're not in an urgency, and you will go through some phases where you just take time for granted and you're just like, I think I'm just going to chill for the next 3 weeks. Like that might be a thing. Like that might
Yeah,
I'm gonna take mental health months, okay,
right.
and just relax. So I think that could be a thing in the future.
That Star Trek future, that ideal where, because they always talk about that money doesn't exist, and if you look at the Star Trek movies, right, and the Star Trek shows,
Yeah.
you're beyond that. And there was that one movie where they went back in time, and they had to figure out they didn't even know what money was, and that they're just walking around and they're like, "What are you doing? You got to have money." And they're like, "Money," but that's one of that ideal future. I think it may exist because like that's something that AI may get to that point where you free up that time. The things that are the most important, you start to think about. A lot of us, when you like talk about the path you've gone on spiritually, that's one of the things that you find as you go that path is like I know it becomes cliche, but the journey is the jewel in all of it. I talked to one guy and he was like, I don't think I'll ever reach enlightenment. Well, for one, that's a state that is not meant to just stay in. You're floating through those, is the way I look at it. Number one, and I look at um, all the spiritual leaders and models, and that as I read about it, and I see that seems like an epiphany that everyone comes to is that carrot that's being dangled of enlightenment or
Yeah.
salvation in some cases, in some ways is meant for you to come to that realization, like that we talked about the birth and death, right? To come to that realization earlier so that you do start to really enjoy that every moment of every life, of your life. And it's not, even though we know we have things, we have bills, we have all these different things that take us away from that. But if the moment comes where that flip side of birth comes and the other side comes, you're not going to care about any of that. That's not going to even matter. And that is part of the delusion in the deluded world, is that we've created these things that we think. And that's one of the biggest, it'll take a shift in the way we think of each other and, um, and like what is considered work, right? Our identities are so wrapped up in what our careers and what we think we're supposed to be doing to create money. And
Yeah.
that may not necessarily be, I mean, I don't believe that is really what humans are meant to be, right? We have to, but we get to that point, and then it does take those points of reflection and things of that sort to really, like I said, you can have urgency, but it doesn't have to be panic and frantic. Urgency might just be urgency to get to the point where you can enjoy your life for what it is, and you can go and share that with others, because that's another big piece, right? Self improvement for the sake of others. That's another core part of the practice. It's not just closing yourself away and being, I'm good on my own. It's once you realize that like, once I realized, like, okay, I've 3 years without a 9 to 5, and I've been able to use AI to create these systems. Now I want to share that with folks to be able to apply that to their lives, because I realize that that's when I get to the benefit as well. I feel great when I help someone to in that situation come to a realization that they didn't see before. Those small moments mean everything. A lot of times
Yeah.
the thing that we're striving for, once we get it, it's anticlimactic.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And what you're doing, right? Like, and they always tell you this, like, they're not gonna put, you know, this person then on your tombstone doesn't say director of finance, doesn't say director of marketing. And another thing too, even for me, like when I eventually pass on one day, hopefully it's a long, long time for now. But it's like moments like this, conversations like this I'm sharing with you, like these are the things that I will love to pass down to my children, or these are the things that like I will die with, right? This is the fruit of my life. Like what I did at work, they're not gonna comprehend that like all right, James had these KPIs and they're
Yes.
gonna put those in their picture. You're like, well, I mean, I don't know how to interpret this, but I guess he was a good guy at work, but it doesn't tell you who I am to the core. And I think and I pray that AI continues to push us as people to be humans, and stay humans and really focus on building human to human relationships. So I think that can be the potential future. And then with that said, because we do have to wrap up, but I have a few more things I wanted to say to you, but before I do that, how can folks find you if they're looking for your mentorship, if they're looking for any guidance? What's the best way for someone to get engaged with you? And are you accepting new people to kind of reach out to you now?
Right, right. So right now I'm working with folks more on a one-on-one basis, and I'll be probably starting some small groups here soon. But at layup.digital on Instagram is the best way to get to me right now. You can DM me there and follow me there. I've not really done much with YouTube, but this is a great podcast. I might see to put that on there too, so you'll be able to find me there too. But I don't want to thank you, James, for allowing me to tell my story. I think what you're doing is amazing. And
Thank you.
I'm glad that you came to that realization. I personally have always thought about, oh yeah, that'd be fun to have a podcast, and I'd want to do that. But you have actually put it to action. I love what you're doing. And I think that there is a school of thought that talks about AI in the future. And when we won't, you know, if we get to the point where we have satellites with servers and AI's running, the digital versions of ourselves may continue to live on long after our physical bodies have transitioned,
That would be
right?
trippy.
Yeah, it would be. And so things like this, even though I've heard some pretty crazy good AI podcasts, it's crazy how they're able to do that and even have to do voice inflection. But things like
Yeah.
this are going to be there for eternity. And so
Yes.
your approach and the how genuine it is, and how allowing folks to you know to be themselves and truly bring it out. I think that it will have effects a lot longer than just right now, let's just say. So I really appreciate
Thank you,
the
sir.
opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. And one other thing I wanted to mention to you is like we've got more episodes coming up. I'm gonna send you a list, and you have an open invite to come back and join a conversation, and be part of a discussion. Like I'm gonna have more. There's someone else who wrote a book about the future of jobs and AI, and I'm working with him to bring him on. So you. I'll send you the details, and you're welcome to come on to that episode. And then I think I'm gonna have more episodes on like um AI and as it impacts in the careers, and then the airline travel, all types of different conversations. So I'll share them with you, and I'll keep feeding them. And then if you ever say, hey, look, I would love to add or sit in, by all means, come and join the conversation. I'll try
Absolutely.
and keep it as fun as possible. And I do feel like these conversations are all, it's like everybody comes and leaves something, but then they get to take something too, right? So I think that's also the beautiful thing. It's like old school trading, it's like
Yeah.
It's like old school trading. When I'm talking old school, I'm talking like Silk Road trading.
Yeah,
It's like this is how cultures evolve, right? This is how spices were introduced
true.
across different regions. It's like these traders are coming through, and it's like, well, you teach me your culture, and I'll teach you mine. Well, this is great. Now you take this spice with you, I'll take that one, and then let's see what happens over time. So, like, that's really one of the cool parts of this podcast is it's literally like I'm just on the route. People are passing through, and I'm trading different things with them, and now we're seeing how that changes the world for the future. So that's the
Absolutely.
cool part about this.
Love it.
And I would say, yeah, if you feel that in your spirit to start a podcast, do it because and I've learned this earlier. You don't regret the things that you tried and failed, but you do regret the things that you never tried at all, right? And I have tried a lot of different things in the past, and I have failed a lot, but I can't ever say I wish I never did that. But I have had moments where I didn't do something out of like, it's not gonna work, and I say, oh, now light. It's you do have I do believe in that there's a window, right? Because your life is changing, everything is changing, the conditions of your life may not be what they are tomorrow. So it's like if you have that in your spirit now, you should just do it because you know, tomorrow may not be there, or tomorrow maybe you have 10 new opportunities, and now you got a really big dilemma. It's like you have the burden of choice.
True.
Who knows? But it's so I do think it's important to if you got it in your spirit, pursue it. And if it doesn't work, it didn't work, but you tried it. And you got and oftentimes when you do try something you fail, you leave with a really cool story. And like I started a and I'll let you go after this one, but I started a business internationally about 7 years ago on the island of Martinique, which is in the French Caribbean. I did a tourism business, and people were telling me, "Oh, don't do it, dude. Like it's like blah blah blah." And I did it anyway, and I was able to run it for about 3 years until we had a hurricane come through. I think it was Hurricane
Mm,
Maria, and kind of devastated a lot there, and I wasn't able to recover from it. So we moved on. But the beautiful thing is now I have my son, and I get to share that with my like this is the fruit I get to share with my son. Like your dad did do something. He is bold. So it's okay for you to be bold too. And you get to learn from my failures too. So it's like you get an extra leg up because now it's like I've already created all kinds of stuff where you can play in the sandbox and see, well, okay, well, I saw that he put this together. Maybe I can do it better, right?
that's
There you
awesome.
go. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's
Sometimes you
my hope.
start to look forward to the next failure. I mean, obviously, you're not going to try
Yeah.
to fail on purpose, but
Yeah.
it's like what you that you that's how you start to look at those opportunities. It's like, yeah, I may fail, but man, I'm gonna have a time on the way there.
You're gonna have a story. And that's the beautiful thing about life is like when you look back at your catalog of life, you're gonna see all the things that you the highlights are gonna be the things that you tried. That's probably gonna be the highlight. It's not gonna be because like you said something really important where it's like that you work hard, you hit that success, and it's anticlimactic, right? And you're like, oh, that's it. But for me, it's kind of like when I look back, I'm like going through that journey and telling the stories of how I started Martinique excursions. It takes up so much more time and enjoyment rather than talking about the failure of it. But then when I talk about like, oh yeah, I achieved this, I achieved that, it's kind of like that's cool, it's great, it's important, but like it's really only special to me because I achieved it and others may not be able to comprehend it. But when you make things relatable, like I started a business and I failed, well, people lean into that because they're like, whoa, you failed? Tell me more. What happened? And then the story is more fruitful. It's not saying I'm giving a doom and gloom story, but it's more of a story of about a journey, less than did I succeed or failed. So
Yeah. And the AI, that's true. You talked about the like transportation, and one of the things I read an article from way back, and it talked about the first plane, and it was the Wright brothers, and it talked about how it was going to
yeah,
fail. All the articles talked about how it's no way you could carry people and this and that, and
yeah,
then look at the airline industry now too. So if folks are fearful of AI and things of that sort, or you're scared you're going to get judged, because that's a big thing too. I see that a lot in
yeah,
music too, and a lot of folks that are
yeah,
trying to use AI in some ways, and then there's a lot of people that are gonna that go to slander them for using it in that field, and so you're gonna get a lot of judgment, but that's okay, because at the beginning, that's always how it is. If you're come through with conviction and truth, right, and that's much deeper. And so I just want to. It's all about encouraging folks to explore and to take action versus waiting till it's not their choice anymore.
amen. Amen, sir. Well, thank you again, Justin. I appreciate you. We are, one second. So